In part 2 I'm going to talk about the tracks A Way to Oppose, Pilgrim in Doubt, Don't Give Up That Dream and Cortex, Labyrinthus. In case you haven't seen part 1 of this series called Sounds Behind the Record, be sure to check that out as it contains some general information about the equipment that I've used and some things that I'm going to discuss. So why these 4 songs in this video? Because they share the same tuning. In video 1, We're Building Our Own Monument and Living in Fear share the same tuning, which was half a step down from a standard tuning. And these 4 tracks have pretty much the same tuning with the exception of the E string going another step lower, which means kind of like D drop tuning, but as I'm half a step lower, it's C sharp drop tuning. Also with We're Building Our Own Monument and Living in Fear and a few other tracks have they separate banks on my Boss ES8, meaning that I have presets with the names of individual parts of the songs. With many of the tracks I'm going to talk about today, they have certain presets that they share. For example, there's a preset called Overdrive on my Boss ES8, and this is basically just Cali76 compact bass compressor from the Origin Effects and B7K Overdrive / preamp from Darkglass Electronics. And this simple combination was the cornerstone of 3 out of the 4 songs I'm going to talk about today. So first I'm going to start with the simplest track from a sonic point of view on the album, which is Pilgrim in Doubt. And this song pretty much uses this preset, but when I was recording it in the studio I also had a little bit of fuzz mixed in. If you have seen the part 1, you know that I didn't have Boss ES8 in the studio, so I had certain pedal order on my pedal board and I engaged the fuzz, but actually if you're listening to the song you cannot really hear that. That fuzz sort of gave it a little bit of that edge or a little bit of that high pitch sound or whatever. So I'm gonna show it how it sounds. But because it doesn't really make that much of a difference, I'm just using my first preset in Bang 2, which is called Overdrive. And pretty much the whole song was recorded just like this. And I'm gonna show a few more examples, but now without the fuzz, so that you would get the idea of how it sounds when I perform it live. I recorded this song using my fingers. Then the next track, A Way to Oppose, is a track where I use the pick. And this is again a song mostly based on this combination of pedals. The reason why I use the pick in this song is that it gives me some more dynamic options. For example, when I start singing, I'm muting strings with my palm, giving it a slightly more different sound.
It comes in 3 succeeding waves, never-ending cycle of your days. You seem to have lost that inner voice that will lead you through this void.
And then with the second verse, I play the whole rhythm. The only thing that I add in this track is flanger. After the second chorus we hear a drum and bass part. Drum and bass meaning that you hear only drums and bass, and this is where I engage the flanger from Strymon's Mobius. So it's actually a gray flanger, and this was one of the few presets where I didn't use the MIDI clock out because it's a very fast flanger, and if I synced it with the tempo of the track, it just didn't sound right. So this is how it sounds. Then the song Don't Give Up That Dream is a song which I recorded using also my fingers and a pick in certain part. So again, I'm using the overdrive preset made of compressor and the B7K, and this is how the riff sounds in the song. And this is pretty much the preset that I've used throughout most of the song, but when I start singing, as this is essentially a pop song, I wanted to give it a little more space to breathe, or maybe a little more air. So with my second preset, which is called Dream Clean, I pretty much just have the compressor on, and I've used my thumb
to look back at my life and regret every chance I have let pass.
Then after the second chorus we enter what I call an ambient part, and I think that this is what makes the song really stand apart, because I think that if most people wrote this track, they would keep it pop from the beginning to the end, and I think that this part just gives it a little more artistic feeling. So we hear this huge wall of sounds, and this is the only part on the album where I've used the Titan delay pedal from Redwitch. This is essentially 3 analog delays where you can decide whether they are in series or in parallel. When it comes to this preset in particular, they are actually in series. I'm also using the compressor plus the crystal setting from the H9, which I engaged with the expression pedal going from 0 to 60. And I actually have it reversed, meaning that if I go, I think it's called toe, that's when the crystals are in, and when I go toe, that's when we don't hear them. So it sounds something like this. And this is a part where I've used a pick, as the delay repeats are slightly more pronounced when using a pick. After this part we hear a heavier part. Now I'm not really sure if I use the pick or my fingers here, but I think I've recorded with my fingers but usually I play that with a pick, and it goes something like this. First we hear that riff. The final track of the album is called Cortex Labyrinthus, which is a 15 minutes long epic track, and I have pretty much 5 presets here, and these are like 5 sounds that I've used. So when we look at part 1, when the song starts, what we hear is actually a combination of 2 sounds which I recorded separately, and I've put them together into one preset. So the first sound was the compressor and the auto swell engine from the Strymon's Mobius, where I was again emulating that expression pedal. So it was something like this. And to this I edit digital octaver from TC Electronics Sub and Up, and the H9's trem verb, which is essentially tremolo and reverb, and it sounds like this. But when they were joined together, suddenly we had this really great sound where we hear all of that combined together, and with the expression pedal I decide how much of that trem verb I want in, because there are some parts where I go with my heel down and then we don't hear trem verb, and then I go with my toe up and we hear the trem verb. So it sounds something like this.
Once it seems I've gone so far I can't see the starting line. It's getting harder and harder to remember why. Memory of that spark that kept me going all this time seems so distant, like it was never mine.
This sound is a pretty iconic sound on the record in my opinion, and it was more of a like accident. I remember when I bought H9 as a pedal, I bought it I think 2 or 3 weeks before entering the studio, and there were so many sounds when I plugged the pedal in for the first time that I actually couldn't find anything. I was going through the presets and sounds for like 3 hours, and I was just overwhelmed by the amount of the sounds that I could find there. And it's pretty interesting that there were like 5 or 6 pretty important sounds that made it to the record, and one of them was this. I was in the studio and I just recorded it as a sort of a backup sound. I was like, let's record that and we'll see if we use it somewhere. And we used it in a way that when I first start singing, the sound is not there. Then when I stop again, we hear the trem verb. I start singing again, it goes away. Then I start singing in an octave up and it comes back. And all of this can actually be recreated live exactly like I did it in the studio with the usage of expression pedal.
Searching for light in this endless race.
Then when the drums kick in, what we hear is the Cali76 compact bass compressor with the digital delay from H9. And I was again using the expression pedal where I was changing whether it's quarter notes or dotted 8 notes. This is actually something that's so subtle that you wouldn't be able to hear it on the recording, but I think it's much more there when we play the song live.
Complex maze. So much time and so much effort, I've come such a long way. Many climbed walls kept me going every day.
And this preset is also used when the second part of the song called Clues for the Maze starts, and we hear that main theme with the delay.
In this fight.
The preset 3 is called Cortex Lead, and this is pretty much the combination that I've used with all the songs that I've been talking about in this video. So that's compressor and the B7K overdrive, and this is what I use through most of the part 2.
One of the most crucial things is to discover motivation from within.
Also, when we hear that big solo in Cortex Labyrinthus, I'm using the overdrive and compressor. This was one of the two parts that I actually sort of improvised in the studio, because when we went to the studio I didn't know what to play here. I knew the notes, I knew the pattern, but I didn't know how to play them, so I just kind of fooled around and this is what I came up with. Also, I recorded this track using a pick because there are just so many parts that I wouldn't be able to play with my fingers. Then after the first chorus in part 2 we hear that big riff, and this is made from the compressor and the Zeus pedal, where we hear a gated fuzz and an analog octaver. And this is actually the only part where I use the analog octaver live, because I can do that and the riff sounds like this. Actually, when we were recording it, the second part, where we hear more of a staccato sound, was actually using the digital octaver sub and up. I recorded the whole riff using analog octaver and also using digital octaver, and I just couldn't decide which one to use because they both sounded very good but very different. Essentially, I decided to go with the analog octaver in the first half and digital octaver in the staccato part. But when it comes to the live performance, I just use the analog octaver throughout the whole part. When we hear the chorus the second time, there is this huge wall of sound, as I call it. I really love it because it creates almost like a head spinning effect. And what is here is, apart from the compressor, I'm using the dotted 8 delay, digital delay from H9 plus multi-chorus from Strymon's Mobius. I'm also muting the strings to give it a more rhythmical aspect, and I'm letting certain notes ring more to emphasize the ending of the part. This sound twice, also at the very end of the song, but at the end I've actually used it a bit differently. I turned off the chorus and I switched over my pickup knob. Usually I have it in the middle, meaning that both of my pickups are engaged, but with this part I use the bridge pickup and it's slightly more bright.